Economic exhaustion. Money runs out before bullets do. This is the biggest reason wars end. World War I is the perfect example. By November 1918, Germany had no money left. Their money, called the mark, became worth 1,000 times less than it was in 1914. Imagine if a loaf of bread cost $1 in 2014 and then cost $1,000 in 2018. That's what happened to Germany. Soldiers couldn't be paid. Factories couldn't buy materials to make weapons. People at home were starving because the government spent all the money on war. Britain wasn't much better off. They spent 36% of all their country's wealth on the war. That's like spending more than 1/3 of everything you own on a single purchase. The Iran-Iraq War showed the same pattern. These two countries fought for 8 years and spent $1.2 trillion they didn't actually have. They borrowed money they could never pay back. Finally, both sides realized they would destroy their countries completely if they kept fighting. They stopped not because they wanted peace, but because their bank accounts were empty. This pattern repeats throughout history. Rich countries can fight longer wars. Poor countries must make peace quickly. Death of key leader. Sometimes one death changes everything. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, his empire stopped growing instantly. He was only 32 years old and had conquered most of the known world. But the moment he died, his generals started fighting each other instead of conquering new lands. The Macedonian Empire split into pieces within days. The 100 Years' War between England and France changed completely when King Henry V died in 1422. He was winning the war and almost became king of both countries. But when he died suddenly from disease, England lost its will to fight. The same thing happened in Africa with Shaka Zulu. He created the Zulu Empire through constant warfare. When his brothers killed him in 1828, the Zulu stopped expanding immediately. In modern times, Hitler's suicide on April 30, 1945, ended World War II in Europe. Germany surrendered just 8 days later. Without Hitler, the Nazi government had no purpose and no power. Throughout history, armies have often fought for a person, not a country. When that person dies, the war dies with them. Nuclear weapons threat. Nuclear weapons changed how wars end. The Korean War was stuck in a bloody stalemate by 1953. Neither side could win. Then President Eisenhower let China know that America might use nuclear weapons. The war ended within months. Both sides signed an armistice that continues today. In 1999, India and Pakistan were fighting in the mountains of Kargil. Pakistan started preparing its nuclear weapons. India did the same. The United States stepped in immediately. The war ended in weeks because everyone understood what nuclear war meant. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 almost started World War III. The Soviet Union put nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. America put warships around Cuba to stop more missiles from arriving. For 13 days, the world held its breath. Both leaders, Kennedy and Khrushchev, realized that nuclear war would destroy both countries. They found a deal to avoid war. Since 1945, nuclear weapons have prevented at least 13 major wars. Countries that might have fought massive wars instead found other solutions. The fear of nuclear destruction forces enemies to talk instead of fight. Third-party intervention. Sometimes an outside power steps in and says it enough. The Suez Crisis of 1956 shows this perfectly. Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to control the Suez Canal. They were winning militarily. Then America, which was supposed to be their ally, threatened to destroy the British economy. President Eisenhower said he would sell all of America's British money reserves. This would make British money worthless. Britain stopped fighting within days. They had no choice. NATO's bombing campaign ended the Kosovo War in just 78 days in 1999. Serbia was killing ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. NATO planes bombed Serbia until they agreed to stop. In 1971, Pakistan was fighting a civil war in Bangladesh. India joined the war on Bangladesh's side. The war ended in just 13 days because Pakistan couldn't fight India's larger army. Since 1945, outside powers have ended 40% of all civil wars. Sometimes the threat of intervention is enough. Countries stop fighting when they know a stronger power will step in. Disease and plague. Before modern medicine, disease killed more soldiers than enemy weapons. The Athenian plague destroyed Athens' chance to conquer Sicily in 413 BCE. 1/4 of their army died from disease, not battle. The healthy soldiers were too scared to fight. They went home defeated. Napoleon learned this lesson in Russia in 1812. He invaded with 600,000 men, the largest army Europe had ever seen. But typhus, a disease spread by lice, killed 400,000 of them. The Russian winter was bad, but disease was worse. The 1918 flu pandemic helped end World War I. More soldiers were dying from flu than from fighting. Entire units were too sick to fight. Governments realized they were losing more men to disease than to bullets. In 1485, England invaded France with a powerful army. Then sweating sickness struck. Soldiers would be healthy at breakfast and dead by dinner. The English ran back home, ending the invasion. Before 1900, every army feared disease more than the enemy. Popular revolution. Sometimes the people at home end the war by overthrowing their government. Russia shows this perfectly in World War I. In February 1917, Russians were starving and angry. They overthrew the Tsar. The new government tried to keep fighting, but in November 1917, the Bolsheviks took power. They immediately started peace talks with Germany. Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk on March 3, 1918. Giving up huge amounts of land for peace. Germany faced the same fate. In November 1918, German sailors refused to fight anymore. The revolt spread to workers and soldiers. Within days, Kaiser Wilhelm II had to run away to Holland. The new German government asked for peace immediately. Portugal's dictatorship fought colonial wars in Africa for 13 years. In 1974, military officers started the Carnation Revolution. They overthrew the government without violence. The new leaders ended the colonial wars within months. When people refuse to support a war, governments must make peace or face revolution. Mutual exhaustion stalemate. Some wars end because both sides are too tired to continue. The Iran-Iraq War is a perfect example. They fought from 1980 to 1988. After 8 years and 1 million deaths, the border hadn't moved. Both countries were exhausted and bankrupt. They agreed to stop fighting and return to the original borders. All that death and destruction achieved nothing. World War I's Western Front was stuck for 4 years. Millions died to move the line a few miles forward or back. Finally, everyone was too exhausted to continue. The War of 1812 between America and Britain ended the same way. After 3 years of fighting, neither side had won anything important. The Treaty of Ghent put everything back exactly as it was before the war. The Korean War ended in a similar stalemate in 1953. After 3 years, the border between North and South Korea was almost exactly where it started. Since 1816, about 31% of wars between countries have ended in stalemate. Sometimes both sides realize that victory is impossible. Weather and natural disasters. Nature has ended many wars. Japan was saved twice by typhoons. In 1274 and 1281, Mongol invasion fleet sailed toward Japan. Both times, massive typhoons destroyed the ships. The Mongols lost over 100,000 men to storms, not samurai. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, meaning divine wind. They believed the gods had saved Japan. Napoleon discovered general winter in Russia in 1812. Temperatures dropped to -37 degrees Fahrenheit. Horses died. Guns wouldn't fire. Men froze to death while walking. Mount Tambora erupted in 1815, just as Napoleon returned from exile. The eruption threw so much ash into the sky that 1816 became the year without summer. Crops failed across Europe. Armies couldn't find food. This helped end Napoleon's comeback attempt after just 100 days. In the Caribbean, hurricane season has determined the timing of wars for 400 years. European powers learned to stop fighting from June to November. Ships and armies couldn't survive the storms. Negotiated peace treaties. Talking ends more wars than fighting. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 ended the 30 Years' War, which had killed 8 million people. Diplomats talked for 5 years to find a solution everyone could accept. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 ended the American Revolution. Britain agreed to recognize American independence. America agreed to pay debts to British merchants. Both sides got something they wanted. The Camp David Accords in 1979 ended 30 years of war between Egypt and Israel. President Carter locked Egypt, Sadat and Israel's beginning negotiations for 13 days. They finally agreed to peace. Egypt got the Sinai Peninsula back. Israel got recognition from its largest enemy. The Dayton Agreement ended the Bosnian War in 1995 after 21 days of talks in Ohio. Negotiated settlements end 42% of all wars. It's the most common way wars end because both sides usually prefer a deal to continued death. International pressure and sanctions. Economic punishment can force wars to end. The Falklands War in 1982 ended partly because the world isolated Argentina. The United Nations condemned the invasion. Countries stopped trading with Argentina. Without spare parts for their weapons, Argentina couldn't keep fighting. Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, fought a civil war for 15 years. But international sanctions destroyed their economy by 1979. White rulers had to accept black majority rule because the country was bankrupt. South Africa fought in Angola for 13 years. But weapons embargoes and trade sanctions weakened their military. They withdrew in 1988 when they couldn't maintain their equipment. The First Balkan War ended in 1913 when the great powers of Europe threatened to intervene. Small countries feared what Britain, France, and Germany might do. Since 1990, economic sanctions have helped end 33% of civil wars. Countries need money and trade to fight wars. Cut those off, and wars often end. Religious. For centuries, religious reasons ended many wars. The Reconquista was Spain's 781-year war against Muslim rule. It ended in 1492 when Spanish leaders said God's mission was complete. They had driven the last Muslims from Granada. The war was over because God said so. Joan of Arc inspired French victories against England. When the English captured her in 1430, the French saw it as God's judgment. French morale collapsed and they sought peace. Medieval Europe had the Peace of God movement. Churches declared that wars must stop on religious holidays. No fighting from Wednesday night to Monday morning. No fighting during Lent or Advent. These religious truces gave exhausted countries excuses to stop fighting. Constantine claimed he saw a Christian cross in the sky before the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 CE. After winning, he ended Rome's civil war and made Christianity legal. Religious justification for peace was often the only acceptable reason to stop fighting in medieval times. Technology making war obsolete. Sometimes one side's technology is so superior that fighting becomes pointless. The Anglo-Zanzibar War lasted just 38 minutes on August 27, 1896. British warships destroyed the Sultan's palace with modern artillery. The Sultan surrendered immediately. There was no point fighting British technology with swords and old muskets. Japan surrendered in World War II partly because atomic weapons made resistance pointless. Why sacrifice millions of lives when 2 bombs could destroy 2 cities? The Gulf War of 1991 ended in just 100 hours. Iraqi forces couldn't fight American smart bombs and night vision. They surrendered by the thousands. World War I showed how machine guns made cavalry charges suicide. Horses and swords couldn't defeat machines that fired 600 bullets per minute. Wars that once lasted years now end in days when one side has overwhelming technological superiority. Cultural exchange. Humans sometimes refuse to fight each other despite orders. The Christmas truce of 1914 nearly ended World War I by accident. On Christmas Eve, German and British soldiers started singing carols. They met in no man's land, exchanged gifts, and played soccer. About 100,000 soldiers stopped fighting. Generals had to threaten executions to restart the war. The soccer war between Honduras and El Salvador in 1969 lasted exactly 100 hours. It started over a soccer game and ended when both sides realized how absurd it was. The Pig War between America and Britain lasted from 1859 to 1872. The only casualty was a pig that ate some potatoes. Soldiers from both sides became friends and held dinners together while their governments argued. They refused to fight over a pig. The Anglo-Dutch War from 1651 to 1654 allegedly ended without either side knowing they were at war. No battles were fought. When diplomats met years later, they laughed and signed a peace treaty for a war that never really happened.